In this second part of the lecture, I'm going to show two cases to you, contemporary cases of urban planning. The first one is super killing, and the second one is know-how. And then at the end, I'm going to explain a little bit about product one. Okay? And if you need another break, you tell me. It's important not only for you, but for myself. So it's good to have breaks. Sometimes, if you are here, sometimes but I think it's very important to have breaks. So please tell me, okay? I appreciate that. So, how many of you know Super Kidland? Can you raise your hands? But really raise the hands. Only your hand. Or you do also know. No, det kan jag godt vise, så ja, måske kender I ikke nogen, men there you go, oh, okay. So how many people, just to have an idea? Okay. Then here, the here, super killer. But they also might be home to the hill family. Urban planners from all the world, they come here to see that project. So people go all there. Take a look on that. But let's come back to the beginning. So I'm going to talk briefly about two Danish contemporary urban planning projects as an introduction here. Okay. So that project was designed by Big. Do you know B.R. Engels? Mm-hmm. The guy that did the Orotella, BL, and a lot of other buildings, right? And this project is really, how do you say, a paradigmatic change. Do you know what that means? In terms of, I showed to you before 4 pictures of 4 different urban planning projects. You know, Vesterbro, and then I showed Weber Park, and yeah. So at each of those projects, urban planners, or people in the world in general, they have different visions of the world, how people should behave and how cities should be. And from the 90s to now, we have changed a lot the way we think cities should be. And it has to do a lot with show, fun, that we said. So he really said the key word there. So we really should think about people. We are not machines. Like here, you know, you guys are my students, right? You can think in general students, but in fact, each of you, you have your own lives, your own dreams, your own desires, your own expectations, your problems, your whatever, you know? We have a whole universe in each of our minds. So there is a lot of diversity. And then when we design, we should not have a general rule. There is no cake rule when you do urban planning. So that's also challenging. I gave a course called, what was it called? Mobility planning and projects this semester. And the students were always asking me what is right, what is wrong. But when you do mobility projects or urban planning projects, it's hard to say what is right, what is wrong. Depends on the context. Depends on the people that are there, your clients, the budget. I think it depends on so many things. Depends on what existed there before. So how can you transform that space? You know, and another big thing. Until the 60s, when you did a design, for example, of a square, you define what people would do in that square. Oh, here is going to be a playground for kids. Here is going to be an area for elderly people or whatever. No, everything was very well defined. So people should walk this way or that way. A very good example, I think in DTU maybe you can see that in Lundby, but maybe not not here, but a lot, or parks in general. There are a lot of parks that has these very orthogonal paths. And then you see a lot of lines on the grass. Do you know how those lines are called? No? Perfect. What is your name?
Oliver.
Perfect, Oliver. Fantastic. They are desire lines. And that word desire is magic, no? It's my desire. Why this urban planner should decide if I should walk this way or that way, right? So it's quite, I think that's a great example that you should always think about it. When you see all those orthogonal lines and those kind of things, there is something called a desire line. A very good example, again, if you walk from Malmo Park into Bellerup, how many of you have done that? Can you raise your hands more? Okay. So you left Malmo Park and walked all the way to that corner here. How many of you went down to the cross and up? Because I don't do that. I take the car park and I cross. That's my desire line, you know? But that was not designed for that. So the big change that we have is that nowadays, when you do urban planning and we think about public domain, squares, even buildings and even campus of universities, we think about a place for different desires. So we should do an arena where people decide what they want to do. We should not decide what people should do. For example, Suna Boulevard. Have you ever done a barbecue or dancing, whatever there? Do you know where is Suna Boulevard? Or maybe I'm not pronouncing properly. Suna Boulevard in Povestebro. Can I? Yeah, but the idea of that project is that you don't have that many predefined things. People should occupy that space in different ways. It's the same thing with Kubu, for example, or even with Islandbrook on the beach. The idea is that you try to make as less predefined rules as possible. So people should occupy and use place in a different way. And that's the major idea of superkilling. There are two major ideas. The first one is that let's open up that space and create a big public arena. People should occupy that the way that they want. That's the first thing. The second thing was something that's called empowerment. You know what that means, empowerment? Yeah? Nobody? Yes. Yes. Well, yeah.
Support, amplify.
Yeah, also, but it's the idea of empowerment. When you say that in urban plan, is very much about a strategy to give power to the community. So you hand the power to them, and you can do that through design. So if you improve a neighborhood, if you make change in that neighborhood, if you add facilities, a library or a public area with high quality, that gives power to that neighborhood, okay? And there is a classic case that's called, I don't know how familiar you are with Pakenham, South London. It's Oliver. Yes?
No, I just heard about it.
Okay, that's great. But Pakenham is a tough area. It's in London. It's known to be a tough area. There is a lot of social challenges and things like that. And the London municipality decided to do a big investment in the area to empower that population, you know, and to give value to their own culture. So they made a lot of change in the area. They built up a community center, library, but also they try to do and design in a way that reinforces the local culture and the positive things about the local culture of the minorities living in Pakenham. That was very much what this project was about, and also was a big opportunity to take old tracks from rail tracks and transform that in a public area, in an area that you don't have that many leisure spaces. And B.R. Engels did that in a very fun way. It's very fun space. I don't know how many of you have been walking there, but it's something quite unexpected also. So that's the plan. The idea is to connect the neighborhood and use that space in between the blocks that were there obsolete and without end use. This street on the bottom is Nobreville, if you can. And the interesting thing here, we talk about pre-existence. Those buildings on the top, they all buildings that were already there, where different uses were added to those buildings. So you had some history there. You kept the story of the architecture, but you transformed the uses. And that's a very important strategy in urban planning, that you can talk both in terms of retrofitting of the building, but also the transformation of the program of that building. I'm just showing very briefly some pictures. And then we are going to talk now more deeply about know-how. I think that picture here, this map is quite interesting, but because show some very important axes of development and transformation in Copenhagen. I can't see my mouse. But anyway, you all know it's know-how, right? Up, down there. So, when we talk about know-how and when you talk about urban planning know-how, you're talking about urban transformation. You guys said that at know-how before, you have a port, you have a lot of industries there, silos. So it was a very different program than you have now. What's something that's very common in North European cities regarding industry, silos, and ports? Yeah.
Okay. At least in Denmark or Copenhagen, at least in the summer, people like to swim in the harbors.
Yeah.
Could be one thing. Also, concerning fun in public space.
That's great. And you know that everything was very polluted until the 2000s. You could not swim there. But I'll go one step back. And what I want to say, what happened with all those industries, silos, and ports? Yeah.
They were obsolete.
Exactly. So inside the cities, you have those huge areas that in a very small period of time, they became obsolete. They were all running very well in the 70s, but from the 80s on, they stopped to work. Most of those factories, they closed down, they moved to other countries, and then you have these amazing areas on the core of the cities. And that phenomenon came together with another thing. Urban planners start to say, we should not spread around cities. We need density. We need to build up inside the cities. People need to move back to the cities. We need density. So, and it's also much more sustainable. Instead of build more cities, let's take the space of the cities and build where already there is city. So if you take Hamburg, if you take Aarhus, probably some of you know Aarhus, the new library of Aarhus, all that area of development is industrial area. Aalborg, anybody knows Aalborg here? Yeah? So the fjord in Aalborg, all that area just next to the city center. You have the, what's the name? You have Ursel Center, the Philharmonic, you have all those buildings there, and that was all industrial area in the most valuable area of the city. If you go to Barcelona, Bilbao, London, all those cities, they have the same challenge. We don't have any more industries, And we have this amazing area. What should we do with those areas? And that also came together with the economic transformation of European cities from industrial cities to service cities. If you see it nowadays, Copenhagen is a service-based city. London, Paris, all those cities. So let's take advantage of all those hectares, those square meters, and let's transform our cities. And that's what they did. A huge, I think maybe that's the most important example in Europe is the Tate Modern in the South Bank in London, which was a huge power plant that was transformed in the most important modern art museum. That was a big step. And then probably you guys know at Islandbrug, the silo with the bike bridge crossing from Fisketorp to the other side. That was a silo and became a residential building. All that area has been transformed strongly, but also transforming the image of Copenhagen. And know-how is very much about that. So what's happening in know-how is not only in know-how, it's happening all Europe and USA and other places that has been passing through this industrialization process and becoming a service-based city. Okay, so the master plan for new city district for former industrial harbor area. So you have that harbor, and then they start to think about let's make a master plan, a sustainable master plan in that area that also can show to the world and to Copenhageners how can we live in a sustainable way and what is the lifestyle, not the lifestyle, but what could be the contemporary way of living. Of course, there are a lot of future environmental challenges, and it's needed a sustainable approach. And we're going to also talk about that. So the transformation of know-how, the largest metropolitan development in Northern Europe, continues Copenhagen's history strategy of a step-by-step expansion into the surrounding sea. And I think that's very important when you talk about sustainability. How familiar are you with this stamp, the DGNB? Do you know that? Nobody knows? Yeah? People talk a lot about DGNB in regards buildings, but you also can have DGNB for urban planning. So, and know-how got a certification from DGNB, and that's very important. And I put here this link, and I'm going to upload those slides, and you're going to be able to access the website and to take a look what are the parameters and criteria to define our urban planning that has the minimal standard to become a DGNB certified project. This slide is very, I don't know if you can read that, can you? It's very small probably, right? But the DGNB is a very famous stamp that's used. It's German created stamp, but it's used to certify buildings if they are sustainable or not. But it's also used to certify urban planning projects if they are sustainable or not. And then you have here those dots that define if that project is sustainable or not. And that's going to be part of your first product. Each group you pick need to pick at one of those characteristics. And at the site, when you're going to visit the site, through pictures and your experience, you show if they reach that or not. I'm going to give you an example. For example, sustainable mobility options. How can you identify that? Yeah?
Bike paths, walkways that are convenient, easy to get to.
Exactly. It has to do a lot of accessibility it has to do a lot with something that's called the walkable city. Yeah.
I guess local shopping, workplaces.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, that's the five. What they call in Paris, they call the 15-minute city. So you have everything. You can reach everything walking. So that's very sustainable. It has also to do with accessibility for people with different challenges in terms of mobility. It has also to do with mass transit system. Do you have a mass transit system like metro, train, or something like that, accessible in a walkable distance to that place? Okay. And that's the master plan of the first phase of know-how. Know-how is quite large. It's a peninsula, right? The docks. And the idea is to, different from Orsted. Orsted, you have north, center, and south. And they start to building all different areas at the same time. Meaning that until now, all the areas, they look a little bit unfinished. They are still on construction. So it's a challenge in that way because it's too big and it was not built in phases. They start to build up at the same time. And that was a lesson learned with know-how, which is bigger than Orsted. So the idea is to build up on phases. So after they finish that first part that's close to know-how station, the train station, and then they're going to start the next phase. So it's very important and critical that the first phase gets our urban environment before starting the next phase. Okay, and it has also a critical economic aspect because if you finish the first, instead of starting different phases, that you also need different infrastructures and public investments. You start only one phase, and if you pass through economic trouble, you can stop the work of expansion and just stay with that phase. It gives also more flexibility in terms of development. That's an overview picture of a little bit of the area. I don't know if you can see well here, but that's the Aarhus right there. Can you see the silo? I can't point, I'm sorry. But anyway. So that's a picture from know-how. And the whole idea here that came from industry to this livable city. So very different programs that we have from the 70s to what we have now. So in just 40 years, know-how will become a vibrant waterfront city, providing homes for 40,000 inhabitants and workspaces for another 40,000. That's quite a lot. It's a lot of people moving around there. So there is also reason to have a subway there. And if you see here, this is the Aarhus Kivaté or Aarhus Girl neighborhood, right? That probably most of you know. And the idea is to go building those blocks step by step. And the architecture office that built that is called Kobe. Do you know this architecture office, urban planning office? Yeah?
They are resided in know-how in a old factory.
Sorry?
In an old building.
Yeah.
Reimagined building. Yeah.
Cool. Do you know why this name? Just a small gossip. No? They used to be a couple. And he was from Copenhagen, she was from Berlin. That's why the name Kobe. Anyway, we studied together. So you see here what we have nowadays, and the idea of the expansion that we're going to have in know-how, and we have this greenery. Also the idea to reestablish not really reestablish, but establish natural habitat. So to have this man-made natural habitat at the outskirts of know-how at the end. So, but that's going to take ages to happen. And then we have now the Linnet. What is the name of the new island that they are proposing? Linnet Hall. Yeah, that's coming from here, and it's going to be very close to know-how. So a lot of things are happening in this neighborhood. And that slide here shows a little bit of the what's called the extra loop. Probably for you guys, it's very natural to have the subway. I came to Copenhagen. I lived in Copenhagen before, and then I left Denmark, and I came back here in February. Where I lived here from 2004 to 2009, something like that. And there was no loop, and the metro was just opening. So all this infrastructure is something very new, and mostly financed by real estate. And again, as much as Ørsted, the deal that was made of know-how that development had to have a mass transit system. And that's, again, is something that's very important in terms of urban planning in Copenhagen, or not in Copenhagen, but in Denmark in general, the transit-oriented development. You should never do expansions if you do not have a mass transit system. And that's why was built the subway in know-how, and that was connected to the network of the system. Another very important thing that we have in know-how is called the islets and neighborhoods. So the site is divided in different neighborhoods, and we're going to visit the Aarhus Geokvarter. And it has very much to do with what you said. So those little neighborhoods that compose know-how, they need to have some kind of they need to self-sustain it. So you could do everything walking distance, you add in all those mixed uses, and they should work in a vibrant way. So you should live in a neighborhood that's vibrant. And that's also very challenging. How can you make a neighborhood that's vibrant and at the same time you can respect the silence and the calmness that you need in a residential area? Is that possible to combine those things? And then the second map here shows the cultural heritage. And that's quite interesting also compared with Ørsted. If you see here the black dots are all the existing buildings before the intervention. And the idea here in the project was to use those buildings. How can we take those buildings and transform those buildings? And those buildings, they could add value to the neighborhood. So that was the third strategy of know-how urban planning project, to take in consideration the history of that site. Here also, I forgot your name. Emil. Yeah, Emil also talked a little bit about this 5-minute city. So you could have those dots and you be accessible to all your necessities, but also you build up a loop connecting by public transportation these different areas. And then we have what we call the city on the water, and also the green city. That's the next one. So a city that takes in consideration water and green. There is a policy that every inhabitant in Copenhagen, from the door of his apartment, her apartment, should be 15 minutes from a green area or a blue area. Blue areas are beaches, swimming pools, wherever. Green areas are parks. So should be accessible to green and blue areas in max 15 minutes from the door of your apartment. But we're talking here very dense areas. So it's very different to build up something in the middle of a green park or grass. And then we have what's called the intelligent grid. There is a little bit of redundance. It's redundant here one way, because the intelligent grid and the 5-minute cities, for me, it means very much the same. But the idea here is to mix up these different uses and how you can mix them in a smart way. And that's what's called the intelligent grid. So what I'm showing here, those maps of know-how, are the major strategies of the project. So those are the parameters used to establish the design of the project and the whole plan of the project. And here just some examples how to use old buildings and transform them. And that's an example that we have. Again, another silo. And then in terms of sustainable mobility, also think in terms of hierarchy. Have you ever took your bike and made a ride in a bike lane that does zigzag? Yes or no? Anybody has experienced that? Yes?
Yeah.
Where? Do you remember?
In Herning?
Yeah?
Yeah.
And it's very annoying, no?
Yeah, it's really annoying.
Very annoying. Well, I experienced that in a couple of places. Luckily in Denmark we don't have that much. But usually, that sounds very obvious here. So pedestrians and cyclists, they should have the fastest way. So if I need to connect dot A to dot B, the easiest way should be for pedestrians and cyclists. And then if we need to do some zigzag or detour, we should do with cars. I know that a lot of students here in Belarus come by car, also in Newby, but the ideal situation is to change that hierarchy. And that's not what usually happens. What usually happens is that we have detours for pedestrians and cyclists. How can we design in a different way? Also, if we need to slow down the speed of motorized vehicles, if you want to create a safe environment in the cities, we need to create more narrow streets and with more detours. And also the geometry of the curves and the lines need to take that in consideration. Who should move faster? Pedestrians and cyclists. Who should move slower? Car and buses. They are more dangerous. Of course, I'm talking here about inner city. I'm not talking about the outskirts. Yeah.
It's just been decided that in the inner city of Copenhagen, the speed limit should be 30 kilometers per hour.
Yeah, that's great. And very, very good that you say that. I don't know if you ever see this graph showing in the X line the speed and the U line the death probability when you have a crash with a pedestrian and a car. But I'm not sure, but I think above 60 kilometers per hour is for sure death. The person dies. And I think 45 kilometers per hour, the person is going to have very heavy injuries. That's the highest probability. So above 30 kilometers per hour is the safest thing. Also, it has something to do not only with this, the speed that you have when you have the crash, but also when you drive slower, you can see what's happening. You have a bigger angle of vision. So at 30 kilometers per hour, you can see that. So you can see a little bit of sidewalk, and you can see people that's starting to walk inside the road. But at 60 kilometers per hour, you only see that. It's too fast. You don't have timing to see what's happening in parallel to you. So it's much also unsafer in that way. So if you think in terms of prevention, it's very important the 30 kilometers per hour rule. Yeah. Yeah, and then the blue city, we talk about that, right? You have been there swimming. some of you. I hope, because it's nice. So that's the blue and the green city, as I said before, just an example showing how to connect those cities to those leisure areas and how to create these green environments, inner and also in a human scale. And that's an example here, how they thought about the intelligent grid. So how you could put together different programs, like the Park and Play that we talk about, like the silo that has the German embassy. You also have some other programs. Do you know DAC? Not DAC, blocks?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Do you know what's happening inside blocks?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Who wants to say?
There's like a lot of different things. There's like fitness, but there's also like the Danish Architecture Center.
Yeah?
And then there is some companies as well. And
Yeah.
at the bottom there is parking lot, you know, like the one where you park
Yeah.
the car and it goes down with an elevator.
Yeah?
And so, so there's a lot of different things happening. I think it's kind of I don't know, remember the group. But they're working a lot with getting as much inside the building as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
Also due to the fact that they wanted to have a lot of different investors.
Yes.
So they like kind of like put everything inside the building. It's kind of weird walking into the architecture center and then like watching at the people making fitness on the way up, and then you'd be like in the fitness room, and you'd be like afterwards in the museum, and so there's like a lot of interactions between the.
Yeah, very good comment. Yeah, I think there's just one program used that you didn't mention, housing. There are housing the top floor, so you can also live there. I know that building is very. There are a lot of love and hate, right? A lot of people hate that building. I don't know you guys, but we don't need to talk about that. But I think we should talk about that. How you can create this mix-up and also these different experiences. I think that's quite interesting. Do you know the guys that know Allwork? Somebody raise their hands. What is the name? Is Norcraft? Do you know Norcraft? Who knows Norcraft here? Yeah? Can you talk about it?
Well, it used to be a rough neighborhood.
Maybe you should say a little bit louder.
Yeah, it used to be a rough neighborhood.
Yeah?
It's transformed into, now they have all kinds of sports going on there. I think there's a university. The students can rent the rooms there.
Yeah.
To study. There's pizza places and art exhibitions, I think. So
That's great. What is your name?
Frederick.
Sorry?
Frederick.
Frederick. Perfect. There is also cinema. I don't know if it's still there. Theater. Maybe closed down. Last time I was there was 2010.
I don't think there's a cinema there.
Okay, there is an art cinema there. But anyway, I've been in some conferences in that building. And it's very interesting because you are in the middle of the conference and there was, I don't know if they still have, there was a climb wall. And from the conference room, you could see people climbing at the same time. So you have a lot of activities happening at the same time. But of course, they were locked in terms of acoustics. You could not hear the noise. But the experience is quite different. So if you think in terms of urban plan, you can think about different scales. What can happen inside a building, like a public square, an indoor public square, and also outdoor public square. And that has very much to do with this intelligent grid. And then we have here the Park and Play that we already talked about. But we are going there, all the way to the top. Okay? Yeah, just some pictures. So, we are almost finishing. Probably you guys are tired. And I'm going to talk a little bit now about the product that you need to do for this first week. First of all, I don't know if I already. Sorry? Yeah? Okay. That's good.